Hello, everybody. My name is Peter, and I'm going to be your host for today. I'd just like to welcome you all to this ELN webinar with Vertex. Now, before we begin, there's just a little bit of housekeeping. As you can see, because this is a webinar, you don't need to worry about video or being on mute. However, we would like you to interact, and there is a chat function. So if you find the chat underneath the menu, at any time, please feel free to ask a question or make an observation, and I'll be monitoring that all the way through our webinar. And if there are questions, I'm going to bring them to our expert Wendy for she and I to discuss them. So at any point, ask a question in chat, and we'll talk about it at the first convenient break. Now, as this webinar is being recorded, it'll also be made available to you within the next few days. So you'll get a link where you can watch this webinar back. So don't worry too much about taking lots and lots of notes. I'd rather you just listen to our expert, and then we could always follow up afterwards. So the agenda for today then. In a moment, I'm going to hand over to Wendy from Vertex to introduce herself and the organization and set the scene for our topic of discussion for today, which will be about tax automation and how it can improve VAT compliance. Also about how adding a tax engine adds additional value to your stakeholders, and automating these processes can enhance the overall process of everything from the data gathering to review, sign off, and analysis. And then we're going to have a very, very short summary at the end, where I'll just recap a couple of the points and tell you what happens next. And so what I'd like to do now is hand over to Wendy to introduce herself, a little bit about Vertex, and set the scene for our discussion. And while she does so, I'm going to pop off camera, but I'm still going to be here. So Wendy, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Peter. Hi, I am Wendy Fishnaller, and I am a business development director at Vertex, primarily working in the UK, Ireland, and the Nordics. But Vertex is a quite a large European organization. So we have 50 people actually sitting in content around Europe that support our rates and rules and things like that. We have a large team in Germany supporting that market. So we are actually a European organization. And I am going to share my screen quickly to kind of set the scene so that you can see what we want to talk about today from a Vertex perspective. So this subject was the rising need for tax technology. So we know at Vertex that your world is global, digital, dynamic, and complex. We see business changes, whether it's mergers and acquisitions, new markets, moving to the e-commerce, opening up a marketplace, regulatory changes. Obviously, we have significant changes within the EU around VAT, and of course, technology changes. That was the big push towards the latest versions of Oracle or SAP. This might be something like moving to the cloud or edge technology. All of these things we are considering when we look at our portfolio of products. So constant change definitely equals evolving tax complexities. So we've seen it actually, if you just look at what happened to us in the last 2 years with COVID, we've seen a lot of changes around that. The change in the reduced rate to help the healthcare sector, as an example, some temporary rate changes, the EU marketplace rules, the constant changes around digital services and things like that. So it just means that the world around us who are trying to support VAT for businesses is a constant change. And because of that, we believe that the best way to approach it is to start using technology to better support VAT and indirect taxes. So, how do you solve complex tax problems while making your business more agile and competitive? And we say it's by digitally transforming tax. So, this requires a global tax solution built for change, growth, and complexity. So, it's intelligent automation, and there's multiple ways that we are enabling that. So, whether it's through our O series, our flagship tax engine, which we are constantly improving. We are adding oil and gas content. We're in the telecom space, so different things like that. And whether it's that integration, that really looking at how we can best leverage the information that's in our ERP, so SAP or Oracle, how we can best leverage that to make the best tax decision possible. It might be something with around the compliance space. We just launched a global compliance tool, which has 200 filings and 50 e-filings, along with a data integrity layer that really makes sure that information that's going in is properly formatted, is ready for compliance and for that reporting activity. And it is constantly able to scale with your business. And that's really what we're trying to do. So it's the ability to enable digital transformation and change through the right selection of products. So what is right for your business is definitely not right for all businesses. And it's really how we are able to support you in evaluating that. So we have flexible configurations and deployment options, whether you're just looking at the US, whether you really need a solution for India or Brazil, whether you're challenged with chain transactions in Europe. All of these things we look together with you and say these would be the best suite of products to help you digitally transform your tax environment. So why Vertex? We've been here for 40 years in this space, 40 years doing sales and use tax. We were a small mom and pop shop. We actually went public just a couple years ago. We're still 100% focused on indirect tax, so sales and use tax and VAT around the world. And we ensure all of our product suite is with the best and the latest technology, whether it's the e-commerce applications that we have, whether it's supporting you in billing, whether it's document management like exemption certificates and things like that in the US, and then of course the reporting aspect, which is so important. That data integrity layer that we added on to our VAT compliance tool, just to make sure is the rate the correct rate, is the tax base and the tax amount tying out to the rate, are the vendor's VAT registrations in the right format, all of those things which have to go into that ever important reporting task. So it's global commerce and compliance we're supporting, and it's seamlessly connected with all of our APIs and integrations that we offer. So the perfect combination. It's tax technology, which it was pre-built supported integration for your tax touch points, whether that's a Reba or Coupa, whether that's two SAP systems, old legacy solution, whether it's Microsoft or Workday, whether you've got an e-commerce, like if you're in Miracle, we have we're really excited. We just launched the first inbuilt tax engine within the Miracle landscape. So lots and lots of options depending on what needs your business has. So it's reliable and comprehensive. As I mentioned, we have 50 people in the US, in Europe, and like 200 or something in the US that are maintaining the tax rates and rules. Those are people that you can rely on to ensure that the taxation of your products and services is correct. And industry specific content, as I mentioned, for retail, leasing, and telecom, and we're adding oil and gas. And then, of course, that region specific content, especially where it's really challenging, like Brazil and India and the European Union. Um, we have pre-built supported integrations for all the ERP systems really that you can think of, and the billing applications, and of course e-commerce. And we are cloud. We have multiple deployment options, as I mentioned, which would allow you to leverage them in the way we have on-premise. Of course, we have on demand, which is our private cloud, and then we have a multi-tenant solution. So it's not just tax engines used to be kind of a US only thing that people were looking at. It's not that way anymore. More and more companies are understanding that their ERP systems are just not built for tax. They're not built for the complexity. And when they aren't built for complexity, it means that there is a lag in the time as you massage and manipulate your ERP to your reporting. And as we know, so many tax authorities are continuing to apply continuous transaction controls, which really means that that transaction needs to be calculated correctly the first time. And that's really what we're focused on, supporting that. So it's reliable and scalable. And what we want to give you is a system that evolves as your business grows. It grows with you and can support you as you go into new markets and new distribution channels. And that was what I had as kind of a scene setter. So I will go ahead and turn that back on.
Thank you very much, Wendy. Really interesting. There's a couple of points I'm sure we're going to come back to in the conversation. But before we do, let's have a couple of poll questions. So this is the first point where people can interact. And can I just remind you, if you do have a question at any point, please do drop it into chat. I'll bring it to Wendy and we'll talk about it as soon as we can. But let's go to our first poll question. And the question is this. At what stage is your company at in regards to finance transformation? So if I start the poll now, then I'd like you, if you could, find the poll very quickly, this first question, click on the answer which is closest to your experience. So what stage is your company at in regards to finance transformation? Answer 1, planning mode. We know it's coming, but it hasn't kicked off yet. Answer 2, getting started. We're moving to HANA or Oracle Cloud Fusion. Answer 3, we're midstream of a transformation and hoping for the best. And 4, we just went live, but looking for more to add additional value to that. And answer 5, I'm not sure, I'm just here to listen and learn. I'll give you a few more seconds to do that. I can see we've got a good distribution of answers coming through already. So 5 more seconds. So please try and find that poll, and then I'll end it in just a couple of seconds more. Looks like there's still a few answers just coming in. Right, let's draw that to an end for the moment. We're going to come back and talk about this right now. So, Wendy, interesting results. Actually, It looks like there's a pretty even spread across all of the answers, with the exception of we just went live, but looking for more solutions to support our tax requirements. So, and that was a little less. So I guess our audience are at various stages in their evolution through that. So let's go to the second poll then. And it's this. What tax technology solutions is your company considering as part of your finance transformation? So let's do the same thing again. You know the routine by now. Look for the answer that's the closest to your own situation. So what tax technology solutions are your company considering as part of your finance transformation? SAP add-ins or other solutions using ERP, a tax engine. You operate in the US and know you need one, but maybe even considering taking it global. Compliance solutions, have so many VAT filings and have trouble keeping up. You know, I'm not sure, just here to listen. I think we've got duplication of answers in between 4 and 5. So I'm going to treat those two as the same. And I'll give that another 10 seconds and then we'll take it from there. Gosh, this is quite interesting because I can see the results changing. So 5 more seconds. And I'll stop it there. So Wendy, this one, it looks like the compliance solutions makes up the most responses. So that is the most popular. We have so many VAT filings and are having trouble keeping up. And I think that probably relates quite well to some of the points you were making. So one of the things that typifies the last 18 months or so is obviously everybody has had to do so much transformation at pace. Including having to do a lot of work with our value chain. We've had to find new sources of supply, often those have been international, and new markets, and those are often international as well. And there's been, as you said, a great deal of volatility. Every time you think you've got a stable situation, something comes along and disrupts it. But it's also extremely complex, and perhaps even worse, it's not very predictable at the moment. So I think if anybody at the moment said, oh yeah, we've got a very good 2-year plan, we know exactly where we're going to be in 2 years' time, I'm buying shares in that company, because I think most of us are actually in a very responsive mode. So your point about where we are right now, complexity, volatility, unpredictability, well, of course, one of the ways that you can deal with that is to use a tooling set that allows you to actually adjust quickly. And as you said, that may be that the lag from some of the systems businesses have already been relying on is simply not now allowing them to do that. Yeah. So then, Wendy, in this discussion, and as I say, if I could ask our audience, if you wouldn't mind, if you have a question for Wendy, please do put it in. So Wendy, tax automation. So how does tax automation help improve overall VAT compliance? Is it simply a case of it just speeds everything up, or does it have other aspects that it brings into that process?
So really in this area, there is quite a few things to consider. The first thing that you always want to consider when you're considering these solutions, especially around tax compliance and things like that, is that you really grasp what your global issue is, or how what your global requirement is in that area. And what we have found, and this there was a big push like 10 years ago where we did these big ERP transformations, and with that came this finance transformation, which we're seeing again. That one back then was about centralizing finance functions. And so we saw a big pickup in the tooling space because people were solving problems for the US, but because they were doing this finance transformation and trying to have a global approach to tax, a lot of the US solutions were kind of pushed out to the rest of the world. So we saw that with so many multinationals. And now what we see is actually, from my perspective, is more of a VAT pull. What we're seeing is more and more tax authorities are really looking at continuous transaction control, how the filing requirements for the Spain SII every 4 days. A lot of them are getting closer and closer to almost daily e-invoicing. So that's where actually the government basically approves the invoice as you send it out to your customer and things like that. So as we're seeing that, this time that you used to have to do proper compliance, so wait till the end of the month, download your transactions, massage it and make it nice in Excel and push it out to the filing, that's gone. What we're seeing is that you really have to nearly at the beginning, meaning in that transaction, have it calculated correctly. So whether that's by your ERP or whether it's by a tax engine, there isn't time for that manual adjustments to occur and this kind of manipulation that we used to be doing. And that's the main idea behind a lot of the compliance tools and why we have something like this data integrity. It's a data check. It makes sure that what's going into that compliance is correct. So it's going to look at the VAT tax codes, it's going to look at the tax rates, it's going to look at the products, it's going to look at the vendor information or the customer information to make sure that everything is aligned. So if you have a intercommunity transfer or an intercommunity dispatch, then you know that you need the buyer's VAT registration as an example for reporting. So it's going to do all of that. So that's why it's more and more we see, instead of these kind of homegrown, maybe one-off solutions or a local provider in a country, we see more and more that's coming into either a real compliance tool that the business itself is going to run and work with, or they're outsourcing it to a single company who can do it for them.
Great. Thank you very much, Wendy. And I think there's one thing there that you touched on, which I just want to expand on a little bit. So one of the things that went through that transformation, of course, is for a lot of organizations was many of their workforce were sent home for remote working. Mm-hmm. And what that also enabled was, as you said, many of the organizations said, well, if we have remote working, it does enable us to do things like set up a global finance function, which could be located anywhere. Or we may be able to bring together communities from around the world and use this remote working, hybrid working environment to do that. The challenge of that, as you quite rightly put, is that how do you make that global community actually work for everybody rather than just expand on the local? And particularly, as you said, the lag between a homegrown solution of being able to firstly understand everything that you need to do in each of those locales and then make that into a part of your solution and take it forward. Now, you mentioned a little bit of that transformation of finance, which we are seeing. Lots of finance functions are going through transformation as part of a wider business transformation initiative. So let me just ask you this then. Obviously, we could see what this means to our tax professionals, the people who actually have to work with this, and make it happen. But are there other stakeholders who get benefits from this? So, and if so, what are those benefits? So when we add this tax engine function, who wins and in what way do they win?
That's a great question. So really what we're seeing is that the IT organization becomes a big player in this. There's kind of a lot of winners. So the first one is the IT organization. First of all, IT is focused on a lot of different initiatives, and it tends to be that the financial applications, and especially those that are specialized to tax, the tax requirements in terms of manipulation of the data or new custom tables within the ERP and things like this, the things that we need to support natively. As soon as you take it to a tax engine, especially with the integration that we have within SAP, it is designed not for an IT professional to maintain, it is designed for the tax business user. So you can immediately, once you start to look at these applications off of IT's to do list, you can kind of take out the line, maintain a tax solution. And that's a great thing to do because if you think about it, how much time do we spend as tax professionals trying to describe to IT how to do tax, how to do VAT, and really expecting them to understand it at a level that we all understand it, and thinking that if we draw the boxes for the chain transaction and tell them that the goods are going here and the invoices are going here, that that's going to help them in any way. Most IT professionals I know are super thankful if they're taken out of that equation. So not only do our applications meet the requirements of the IT organization. So cloud, as I said, we have this edge technology, which is absolutely an IT functionality that tax people don't really want to know anything about, but is very important for IT organizations. We're meeting their requirements, but at the same time, taking something off their to-do list.
Lovely, thank you, Wendy. And it's not like IT haven't had something to do over the last couple of years or so.
Yeah.
And actually, that's quite an important point of itself. As I said, many businesses are going through quite wide-scale transformation. Now, that may have been because they had to, but certainly as we move into the next phase of whatever the next normal will be, many businesses have actually said, well, we've done it once or twice because we had to, now we want to. And they're looking to IT to say, continue our transformation. We've got more projects where we want to look at digitalizing our business or moving some of our IT estate into the cloud. So there is that big agenda, but there's also been a movement, I think, from finance and particularly in tax, which is, as you said, we are the experts. We understand how this is supposed to work within our business. And rather than spend a lot of time forwards and backwards and trying to nail down all of those processes for IT, perhaps there's a way that we can look at what the best of the end-to-end process might look like. So let me ask you about that, if you wouldn't mind then. Mm-hmm. So how does automating the VAT process improve the overall process? You mentioned data gathering and validation, but also things like reconciliation, going through compliance reviews, sign off. I mean, it's part of a bigger value chain, isn't it? So in what ways does it impact the overall process, the overall value chain?
Yep, absolutely. So it is definitely part of that, and it's such an important part of it. And we're seeing it more and more because it's the tax authorities as they push to try to find revenue as a result of COVID and all of the spending that they've all been doing. They're working to decrease the VAT gap, which is one of the most obvious ways to do that, which means they're really going to be much more specific about how we report. They're going to be auditing more. They're going to be looking more to see again that we increase the speed by which they get information and things like that. So when we talk about that overall transformation, you have to keep an eye on what is happening there to realize that speed to report, that the importance of the first time right always for transactions and things like that, the amount of data the tax authorities are going to be collecting and things like that, it just becomes far more important because when we don't meet those requirements, we are going to get charged. And VAT fees and things like that are quite steep compared to other areas. So when we look at our overall finance transformation and we're starting in the planning mode and we realize that we not only want to create a solution that's global, but we want to create a solution that scales. And if we design today, at this point where we are sitting today, a solution for VAT in my ERP, it's not going to scale. Every single new country, new channel is going to require a change in that existing setup. And that could be quite burdensome depending on what you're doing. So with a tax engine, that goes away. You just basically, as you add your new company code, the company code calls out. You have to design your tax codes. You've got to look at your flows, and all of those things stay the same. But the burden on the IT organization to fix and to support those requirements for tax goes away. And so that's just scalability. If you think about as well in this entire chain, if you think, well, I've got to produce the correct form for my customer, and that's got to match perfectly. What I put for VAT on there has got to match perfectly with what they're expecting to receive, the format of the invoice, and all of that. That is all supported again by a tax engine. That takes that requirement of defining the legal fiscal requirements and invoice information and stuff like that into the hands of the tax team, and that supports that overall sales and distribution model that you're creating. And then on the procurement side, also very, very important, because what we have usually is these centralized procurement functions where we have a large team of people that are processing invoices as fast as they can. And from what I understand from sitting in some of these and watching that and training them up, it's really about how fast can we get them through. Accuracy, I'm disappointingly from a tax perspective, falls relatively low. It's really about pushing them through. And so what we want to do is we want to enable them to do the best possible job of classifying those vendor invoices so that we can do that input VAT recovery again without a significant amount of rework and stuff like that. So a tax engine takes that out of the hands of that procurement function. And so really a lot of times we actually see the procurement function is the one that's contacting us and saying, we're interested in your solutions. We see it more and more with banks because they don't have the taxable output, but we also see it quite often that it's the procurement function that says, we need a tax engine, we can't do this anymore. So it really, all the steps in the chain, it really supports the organization overall. It reduces that bottom line, which is very important, and it helps us to support, pressure under audit and things like that. And let's face it, you do not want to be a company that ends up on the HMRC's naughty list of companies, because that also affects your integrity as a company, and people might not want to do business with you if you're not properly calculating and remitting your VAT.
Thanks very much, Wendy. So, yeah, again, some interesting points that came out of that. That as you were speaking, I was thinking about this. So, when you're looking at a tax engine, if you wanted to build it yourself, the first thing you have to do is understand how to build a tax engine and design it. Then, of course, you would have to physically build it. And then once you've built it, you need to maintain it. And every time you make a change in your business or enter a new marketplace, that you then have to augment it. And then you need to run it out at scale, all at the same time as not only is the environment changing, but perhaps your own organization is changing. There's a lot of M&A activity going on right now. Lots of operating models being changed, discussions, optimization about which markets should we be active in. So quite a lot of drivers of the adoption of tax technologies. There's the external drivers, what's going on with government, as you say, that everybody at the moment is looking to increase or at least consolidate the tax take. And they do tend to like VAT because it's seen as a progressive tax. So it's not one that hits everybody unequally, but also internally, businesses are looking for ways to, initially, I think it was husbanding their resources, making sure that they've got enough money and cash flow to keep going. But now looking at how do we, as we potentially could grow into the recovery, how can I optimize the financial return? So quite a lot of drivers. Are there any others that I haven't thought of that you could think of? So the external ones, some of the internal ones, perhaps some of the, as you say, IT just want to moving something off their to-do list so they can focus on something else.
Yeah, I mean, that's the to-do list for both the finance and the tax is a major consideration, because what we see, and we did a study actually, Vertex requisitioned a study around this, but what we see is that our tax professionals don't actually have time for proper planning. So if we can reduce their burden, their workload on those day-to-day activities, really improve the data that they're getting, really improve the calculation and everything like that, then we actually do give them the opportunity to plan and be much more strategic, which is going to add loads of value in the organization. And actually, I think that's one of the reasons that we see companies starting to carve out a special role, which is this tax technology role, who kind of is dotted line to IT because they're having to meet IT requirements, but is also dotted line definitely to tax and finance, because what they're going to do is they're going to bring forth the best applications and software available to support those functions in the best way possible, again giving those tax and finance people time to do something that's much more strategic for the business. So I think that's an important point to make.
It is indeed. And I think other elements of the business would recognize that let's look at the demands on our experts, and how many of those demands could we automate out so that we can give them the bandwidth to play a more strategic role, to help us advise as a business, this is where we need to go. These are the implications of some of the considerations that are on the table right now. So it may not sound a very glamorous part of this, but it is giving human beings, who are the creative part of any process, enough opportunity that they can actually use that in a way that moves the business forward, rather than keep cranking the handle and producing the end outcome of a product or whatever that might be. As you say, a process which is largely repeatable once you have the inputs right. So what makes up a solution like this? What are the key technologies that we should consider, and which of them are the most important?
Well, the most important is a tough question because it really depends on the business, but there's multiple things that you should definitely have. I mean, obviously the first application that every tax person always will have is something like Excel. But Excel doesn't even do half of what you need it to do. So we always recommend that you also have some tools that are better for data analytics. So something like Alteryx, let's say. So once you have something like that, then you're able to better understand what data you have available and where things are maybe going wrong. From the perspective of when you're doing your ERP transformation, or maybe looking at changing your current compliance situation. So maybe you're going from maybe you want to insource, maybe you want to bring it in house again, right? And you're moving from an outsource situation, or you are doing a big transformation, or maybe you're just not happy with your current solution. So what we like to do is say, if you're starting on your S4 transformation, or you're moving to Cloud Fusion, or you're a new business, maybe being spun off or something like that, you definitely should consider a tax engine. And you can put a tax engine in at any point, even in a brownfield, so something that's already existing. But the best time to put a tax engine in is definitely during a transformation. So the tax engine you're definitely going to need a tax engine if you're in the United States and have taxable sales. So that's just a given. And what we like to do is say, if you're doing that for the US, you should definitely consider expanding that footprint, because it will ease the burden in terms of transaction processing and how you calculate. Tax engines have all the information that we would typically have to design in a situation. So when does domestic reverse charge apply? What's EU service rule? How to identify triangulation, and all of those complexities. So the tax engine should definitely be a consideration as you're starting on those financial transformations. And then the other one that we look at too is this compliance. So if you're bringing your in-house, or maybe you're moving off a compliance tool that is older or legacy or something, the compliance tool is definitely the most common one right now, because more and more people are frustrated by the number of e-filings and requirements. Every few months, a couple new forms are coming out and things like that. Our cloud solution actually means that you don't track any of that. The content team manages that all the forms for the countries that we support are there and available. All you do is have a data file that you map into and push it into the system, again through that data integrity level, so checking all that. And then it does all of those filings for you. And the great thing is that takes that management out of your head about, oh, what new filings are coming and how am I going to support that, and things like that. As um kind of an other option that you might have would be like SAP's ACR. So this is their advanced compliance reporting. So this is also, it's a similar tool. The great thing about our compliance tool is it doesn't require OSS notes and things like that. It doesn't require IT, again, to maintain it. It's up to tax content, so Vertex tax content, to maintain that for you. Whereas ACR is something that has to be maintained by your IT, because you have to apply the OSS notes and do the testing and remapping and things like that, whereas all of that's kind of done seamlessly by our compliance tool. So those are the types of things that you really have to look at. What is your organization doing today that might need or needs a better solution for a particular part of the entire end-to-end VAT, right, chain? Yeah.
Thank you very much, Wendy. And I can see we've got a question just come in from the floor. So this is from Jack. And Jack asks, in what ways do these changes affect the way external tax advisors and consultants work with their clients? So if you're an organization and you're already using external tax advisors and consultants, how does that impact that relationship?
Well, there's most we work with, and actually that's what I do. I work with our alliances, so the big four and some of the smaller firms that are specialized in VAT and indirect tax. And what they say, I mean, they're clear. They always like to be the ones that implement these solutions and things like that. There's obviously a big market there. They're very much in demand right now. But it also gives you so much better information. So, of course, we always are going to use our ERP. So, whether it's SAP or Oracle or Microsoft, that's going to be our source of truth, right? That's where the data is that that's really how we're going to base our decisions on, our strategic choices, what we're going to analyze to decide where we can maybe save on VAT by changing the way the goods are flowing or things like that. So that's always our source of truth. That's not going to change. But what does change as you implement these additional solutions is how you handle that and how you can provide that information back to those external advisors. So with our information, we have a lot of reconciliation tools, we have a lot of extra reporting. We have something called indirect tax intelligence, which is really about where are you going to have exposure in the future? What is our areas where you might need to be considering, oh, I might need to have a filing requirement there, or there's probably a better way to handle this problem or this flow of goods and things like that. So it's really about looking at the overall layer, and all of these things our external advisors can use to better understand our VAT position.
Thank you very much, Wendy. And we've had another question, and this one is from Ian. And this, I suspect, may be a piece of string question, but Ian asks, what budget range should be set aside for a tax engine? So,
Yeah.
what should we be
That's
thinking about in terms of investment? And perhaps I can add a little bit to that,
mhm.
in that clearly there will have to be a return. So, if you've got any examples of what kinds of returns people see, that might help as well.
Yep, of course. So, I mean, Ian, it's a great question, and obviously, I would have to understand the size of your business and everything like that. But again, there are really a lot of ways that you can deploy these. So, like I said, we have the multi-tenant SaaS solution. So, great for a more affordable way if you're not doing like global calculations at a high volume. Of course, it has to fit with the overarching IT landscape that you have, meaning a lot of people only go for on-premise or private cloud. They have specific rules around the types of software and the types of things that they can have. um, but in terms of how we approach it, I can tell you from my experience, which there's been a lot. I was once brought into a beverage company who was having some trouble. Actually, the Germany Ministry of Finance shut them down because they were basically doing transactions outside their ERP. And when they came under audit, they got themselves into, yeah, really hot water. So their manufacturing facility, I mean, I think it was like plant to plant, like phone calls to move goods around, which obviously doesn't work in this environment. And they're all very old school, but they really were in trouble. And that was a situation where we had to come in quickly and solve some problems. And they were in really in such a state that they were basically throwing money at it because they just didn't know what to do. That is, yeah, that's not an ideal situation. I wouldn't recommend that ever you allow something to get to that point, and things like that. And that's a very expensive way to go about implementing a tax engine, which is what they ended up doing. However, I have another example. It's a company that does dental appliances, and they bought a kind of a pre-built SAP system, which wouldn't allow for plants abroad to be turned on. So they were in the Netherlands, but they had exposure all over Europe, and they were taking 3 to 4 days to pull the data apart to properly report, which became really difficult when they were going into Spain. And they had a huge push into Spain. Everybody wanted their dental appliances, and they all of a sudden got themselves into a lot of trouble. So the next thing they did was they implemented a tax engine, because it really removed that challenge that they had by this kind of restricted SAP system, and it enabled them to do their reporting much quicker and much better. So these are the types of things that we look at. So we actually have a group of people that helps go into a business and build that business case around it. So we have different questions that we ask, like where are your biggest problems? We talk to tax, finance, and IT, and we find out what are your objectives? What are you looking to do? Kind of overall organizational objectives. Are you centralizing finance? Are you getting rid of finance headcount? These types of things, and then really looking at that and then building out that business case for you. And the funny thing is I think a lot of people think, oh, it's going to be too expensive. But actually, in the end of it, when you consider the number of people that you need to carve out of IT to support an SAP system that really isn't built for VAT, versus the number of people that you will need to support a tax engine, which is a lot less, not to mention the fact that you kind of eliminate that need to have a tax or finance resource in every single country, because we're maintaining the rates and rules for you, and maintaining the legal view on VAT for you. We're really supporting you there. And once you start reducing that, then you kind of start to see that those costs can kind of start to equalize a little bit. So while a native SAP solution might just be part of your system implementer's proposal, so the tax engine might look a little bit more expensive. I think when you consider what you can do for the organization, and then also that freeing up those valuable resources for future planning, it's kind of a no-brainer. Most companies, and that's why we support this business case creation, most companies come back to you and say, yeah, you're right. It felt expensive, or it felt a lot, and it's hard to get tax. Let's admit something as well. Tax doesn't usually have a big budget for software. So you have to really, yeah, you have to have a lot of stakeholders involved. You kind of have to beg a little bit. But once you get over that line, you can really prove to your organization that that was a big value add.
Thank you very much, Wendy. And I think you actually touched on something, a real truism there. This is not, what is often perceived by business as being on the front line, glamorous part of the business. It just happens, doesn't it? How difficult could it be? We invoice and we just sort out the tax afterwards. We did get another question, but I think I can answer Afsana's question, which is, will you be showing the tool, and a little bit about Ian's by saying what happens next? I'll come back to that moment. We are going to offer everybody an opportunity to continue this conversation one-to-one, and that's the right place, I think, to talk about what goes into creating a business case, because I suspect it's not one size fits all. There are different things that different people need, and scalability. I've got another question from Pramila, and it says, if the input data quality is not good, how will this be managed by the tax engine? Would a data cleanse need to be done before implementing the tax tool? So I think this is a common problem for all of us. If we've got rubbish data to start with, do we have to sort the data out before we start our journey of transformation? Or actually, is that part of the process? Or do you have other things in place to accommodate that?
Well, I mean, yeah, this is absolutely everybody's problem. And I can tell you, if you are moving into an SAP or doing a transformation, you probably should sort out your data first anyway. But from a tax engine perspective, yes, data is very important. There's definitely areas that you can work around. Um, in terms of being able to still calculate tax and things like that. So, as an example, I had a company that I was implementing for, and they just did not want to collect VAT numbers. I don't know. They just didn't want to. And we kept saying, well, you're going to need them for reporting. Are you sure? Blah, blah, blah. And they would only do it in certain situations. So What are you going to do? Those types of things in a tax engine, you can definitely work around them, just like you can in SAP. There's always things that you can do, dummy VAT registrations and things like that. Things we don't really recommend, but you can always kind of make them work. But from a data perspective, and more companies are popping up, and I'm thinking of a couple off the top of my head that really help you with that data cleanse. And when we talk about it, we will go through and help you cleanse the data for the data points that we care about, right? From a tax perspective. So addresses and VAT registrations and things that specific parts of your material masters and things like that. But when you really need to do an overall data cleanse if you're going into that transformation anyway, because as we know, more and more data elements are being requested by the tax authorities, all of them, not just indirect tax, but more and more data elements are being required, and we're constantly seeing the need for that good quality data. So I would say, while it's not necessarily a requirement for a tax engine, I would definitely be, as an organization, focusing on that if your data quality is bad.
And you're absolutely right, Wendy. If you're looking at any kind of transformation, then sorting out the data, as indeed is sorting out your process ahead of the transformation or very early in the design stage, certainly helps. One of the things about automation is it doesn't fix systemic problems within your processes. So if it was bad to start with, automating it is not going to make it better. It might make it faster. So it is, I think, also an opportunity, perhaps, as well as a challenge. And these are a catalyst that often brings about really quite valuable change within a business. And so actually, it's the first time we really did sit down and say, let's get this sorted out once and for all. Now, I think I heard something you mentioned a little earlier. And by the way, folks, please keep your questions coming. I'll ask Wendy as many as we can possibly fit in. But you talked, I think, about something called a tax technologist. What on earth is a tax technologist?
It's such a funny term because it's obviously a made up term, but a lot of people in the space, including myself, we think about ourselves as, we're not just tax people, which I absolutely am. I can talk VAT all day long, but we're also so bent on that technology that we kind of came up with this word taxologist or tax technologist. And really what this is somebody who can sit within that organization, who again has an eye on tax, really cares and understands about tax, and whether it's indirect or direct. There's, all of us are all over the place. I'm indirect, but and they keep an eye on tax, but they also again have a concern on what IT needs and wants, and what is the best solution merging those. And I said it earlier, and definitely a lot of big organizations are putting this role is coming in to the business, and actually usually quite high within the business. So something that's reporting maybe even up to the CFO. So something that's more and more important. And we're really trying to encourage people in the space to realize that there is a difference, that embarking on an S4 transformation with your indirect tax team is great. It's better if you have a tax technologist that's sitting there helping translate what they're saying and their requirements to that IT organization. So it's essentially a translator. And that's actually what I've done. So before I joined Vertex, for 20 years, I worked in this space building custom tax engines and working on SAP rollouts and things like that. And I always considered myself the translator. I was the person that could sit between the system implementers, the Accentures, the SAP team, and really that business tax function and what they needed, and translating that over to something that they could put in the system. And that role is incredibly important. So if I was you and you're starting to look at your Oracle or S4 transformation, find one of these people, hold on to them, and don't let them go until you're through that entire process. And ideally, start to think about where they fit in your organization as a permanent hire.
Great. Thank you, Wendy. I've got a question that's just come through. Give me just a second to read this. Okay, I'm going to ask this question. It was sent to me privately, so I'm not going to reveal the name. It says, when we're talking of tax engines, are we only looking specifically at those that support VAT compliance, or, for example, corporate tax compliance? So is your area of focus just on VAT, or is it wider than that?
So my area of focus is absolutely indirect tax, but there are quite a few solutions out there that will help with corporate tax consolidations and definitely in the transfer pricing area. So things that are more impacting direct tax, but my area of focus is indirect tax.
Great. Thank you very much, Wendy. We've only got a few minutes left, so we can probably take one, maybe two questions more from the floor. So if you have a question, ask it now. And whilst you do, we talked about the impetus, the catalyst perhaps being moving towards the adoption of tax technology from the tax scene. But we also mentioned a lot of organizations are centralizing the finance function, and they may be centralizing it and then moving it to a global business services model. How does that affect the adoption of tax technology, if at all? So what about businesses saying, well, we're being led by an overall finance function transformation? How does that impact the adoption of tax technology?
I mean, it's a huge impact, absolutely, and it's a great question. It's really if you are looking to centralize that finance function. So I was working with a well-known commodity company, and they were centralizing that finance function actually into France, and that's why they approached us about how do we build a tax engine that we can better more quickly do our transaction tax more accurately with more control on it, that allows us then to perform those downstream functions like reporting and so forth in a way that we can manage within the smaller team, a team that's less has less global knowledge and things like that. So what we see is if you're going to centralize that function, especially around tax reporting and compliance and anything around finance, you no longer will have the capabilities, and we see more and more companies actually taking this away to, as an example, make journal entries to change tax codes and change those types of things, getting involved when there is some sort of a dispute, meaning the vendor tax is one thing but we've coded it in SAP as something else, getting involved in what type of information needs to go on the invoice and things like that. How do we determine tax in this complex chain transaction? All of these things become much more burdensome when you don't have local tax resources supporting the sales and distribution and procurement processes in all of these countries. So you centralize procurement, they no longer have the ability to understand tax in their local region, and they definitely don't know how to understand tax globally. It's the same thing with that centralized finance function. You can do the best job you can, but you're going to be filing returns probably in Italian and maybe in Hungarian and something else. And that's why it's so important that you enable the tools that will support those endeavors, definitely. And that's why we see the tax engines coming up more and more now. And even we've seen the biggest pickup actually in Germany, which I have to say, I've been in this space for 20 years. I never thought a German company would take on a tax engine. They use SAP. SAP is a German company. They would never see anything else, but even they realize that the burden of doing tax the hard way without a tax engine, so really that a lot of manual effort, a lot of coding, a lot of effort when changes come about, even they are starting to see it doesn't work well. We need to do a better job. And that's really around, yeah, automating that entire chain. So whether it's the tax engine for your transactions or whether it's really using a tool that is built for compliance, not little solutions here and there and a lot of Excel spreadsheets, but really a tool that's built for compliance to help support that desire to centralize that function.
Great. Thank you very much, Wendy. We've got time for one more question, and I think it can be a brief one. It's from Lars Henrik, and he asks, does the Vertex engine contain an excise duty module being able to cope with the movement of dutiable goods? So does the Vertex engine contain an excise module able to cope with the movement of dutiable goods?
We don't support excise taxes, so the calculation of excise taxes. However, we do have a couple of solutions in this area. So I would love it if you could reach out to me separately, or someone from our team will reach out to you and talk through the different options that we have there, because we do have a lot of functionality in this area, but it's not native in the tax engine itself.
Great. Thank you very much, Wendy. And now I'm going to make a liar of myself by actually I'm going to try and squeeze in one last question. It's from Jack. So Jack asks, will tax engines be able to assist in more niche areas such as research and development tax?
That's a good question. We have a lot of functionality and a lot of content in the US, but I am not sure or familiar with anything that might be more global. So again, it's something that I would need to come back to you on after I have a quick chat with our tax content team.
Great. Thank you very much, Wendy.
Mhm.
Lots of great questions. Thank you very much, everybody. As I say, well, I'll talk about what happens next. We are going to answer all of your questions, so don't worry about that if you didn't get a complete answer right now. So in summary then, what did we hear about? Well, there's still in the world a great deal of volatility, uncertainty, complexity to go around, particularly as organizations are going through transformations, whether enforced or voluntary. And that complexity can often be very difficult for organizations to support, particularly in areas where there is also a lot of external change going on, like indirect taxation. As Wendy pointed out, lots of governments are looking to indirect taxation to help them foot the bill of the pandemic for the last 2 years. I think also it's true to say that they've allowed a little bit of latitude over the last 2 years with things like compliance, but they're definitely going to tighten that up. That isn't going to continue into the future, as I say, because the tax take is such a big issue for many governments right now. Now, digital transformation brings along its own challenges. You don't just wave a magic wand, but many businesses saw that they were able to undertake transformations successfully over the last 2 years, and they're looking to take it out into other areas of their business, including finance and tax, particularly as they're looking to identify or optimize their financial position. So how can I make sure that not only is my solution robust, but it gives me some strategic insight? Now, to do that, tax professionals are going to have to find the space within their calendar to make that strategic contribution. So they can advise businesses, yes, we can do that, but if you do, these are the implications. Whereas if we did that, that has a slightly different implication set. Ultimately, at the end of the day, that's going to hit us in terms of its impact on the bottom line, our exposure to risk and compliance. It could also make actually the compliance burden a lot easier, in that it isn't running around trying to find all these different sources of truth, bringing them together, identifying that there may have been miscommunications and so on. So finance transformation is certainly underway for many organizations. Many of them either are including tax transformation within that, or tax transformation is actually coming about as they move into these new markets and they realize we just can't use one set of rules to accommodate everybody. And then we talked about, well, why use a tax engine, an external one? Why not do it yourself? Well, clearly, if you do want to do one, you're going to have to be able to design it. That means you need to know everything that needs to go into it. Then you need to build it, which is not an insignificant task. Then you need to deploy it and get it out there. But perhaps more importantly, you'll need to maintain it, and you'll need to constantly change it as your businesses constantly change. IT are probably not going to thank you for putting that on their to-do list. So actually, if you can take it off their to-do list and say, we can support a big part of that by using a best-in-class tool like Vertex, you get all of the advantages of the resources of a global organization in designing and building and deploying and maintaining a solution like that, as well as giving both IT and yourselves a bit of breathing space to deal with the continuing changes, which undoubtedly are going to happen at least for 2 years. And personally, I think the pace of change is going to continue at this rate for a while, because we're certainly not into a stable next normal yet. I also liked Wendy's point that, for some organizations, it was a case of, well, we from the center, we design it and we push it out and everybody else has to conform. Whereas I think many organizations, particularly as they're changing their organizational structure, are actually they're pulling a demand. We do need to deal with this problem. This is what we need out of our solution in order to do that effectively. And then there is expertise required in acting as that translator. I think, Wendy, is the word that you used, between those that really understand tax and technology and the other stakeholders in the business. For example, IT. But perhaps some of the other people who are looking at re-engineering processes. Now, undoubtedly, many of you are used to using things like Excel or some of the functionality within ERP. This is a way of augmenting and extending that functionality and giving you capabilities that you didn't have before. So it's well worth finding out a little bit more about that. So then, this is why we're going to do what we're going to do. For all of you that have been on the webinar today, and for all of you that have asked questions, thank you very much. Afterwards, over the next few days, we're going to reach out to you all, and we're going to offer you all an opportunity to continue this conversation going one-to-one. So if you were interested to look at, well, what does it look like? How does it work? That might be an opportunity to have that conversation. If you're interested to figure out, how do I make the business case? Who do I need to be involved? What are the things I need to think about? That's a great use of that conversation. So I look at it as your opportunity to get some free consulting from the experts in the field, Vertex. Yeah. So look out for that. Take advantage of it when it comes in. And with that, all that really remains for me to do is to thank our expert today, Wendy. Wendy, thank you very much indeed. You've answered all of the questions, I think, as best you can in 1 hour. Vertex, who have made this webinar possible, the Executive Leaders Network for organizing it and doing all of the background magic. But most of all, I want to thank all of you for your participation, for your questions, and for your attention. And with that, as promised on time, thank you very much and goodbye. Thank you now. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.